Hello, I'm Fuli Batibo. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera. Your look at the world of business and economics. This week, China's designs on the Indian Ocean. Beijing's investing billions in ports in Myanmar, Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Can India counter China's geopolitical and economic might? Jacked up rents and shoddy maintenance. The tenants who had enough and pushed Berlin for a local referendum to strip a German stock market listed company of tens of thousands of homes. And a toxic relationship. We look at how organized crime groups have turned Romania into Europe's dumping ground. After its rapid and chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years of war and failed nation building, Washington was keen to reassure countries, mostly in Southeast Asia, that it would stand by them as China asserts more control over what it considers its territory. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, on a trip to Singapore and Vietnam, accused Beijing of bullying and called its claims to the South China Sea excessive. Now, China, Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines and Taiwan lay claims to parts of the South China Sea, which is crossed by vital shipping lanes and contains gas fields and rich fishing grounds. China has established military outposts on artificial islands in the South China Sea and objects to foreign warships sailing through what it claims is its sovereign waters. But China is extending its reach into other territories to protect what it considers its Maritime Silk Route, which is part of its multi-billion-dollar spending package, better known as the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, that route starts in Shanghai, calls in at ports in Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, and Malaysia. And crucially, it's paying billions of dollars to build ports in Myanmar, 2 in Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. As you can see, it completely encircles India, raising concerns in New Delhi about its influence and China's expansive foreign policy and navy, which is many times bigger than its own fleet. And with good reason. Sri Lanka lost control of its strategic $1.4 billion Hambantota port to a Chinese company after it couldn't keep up with debt repayments, which has become known as China's debt trap policy. China is also developing the only deep-sea port in South Asia, in Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo. That's the problem for New Delhi because 40% of container cargo are offloaded to smaller ships for the short trip to India. And then there is the Gwadar port in Pakistan, built as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a $60 billion project linking the Arabian Sea to China's landlocked western region. Access to the Indian Ocean sea routes is critical to Beijing, as today China is the world's top oil importer, purchasing 542 million tons of crude oil in 2020. Last year, 53% of China's crude oil imports came from the Middle East and passed through the Indian Ocean. Well, let's get some analysis with Collin Koh, a research fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. He's joining us on Skype from Singapore. Thank you very much, Collin, for being on Counting the Cost. Now, China has been very strategic in the way it's expanding its reach in the Indian Ocean. What is its end game?
Ultimately, China wants to ensure that its core national interests are being met. And I think in this sense, its continued access to the key lines of communications that will guarantee and uninterrupted access to its energy supplies that it gets from the Middle East and North Africa will be secured. And given China's expanding economic interest in the region, especially given the investments under the Belt and Road Initiative, I think China also wants to ensure that these interests are properly covered in the long term.
Right. Beijing is claiming, of course, to be protecting its trade routes, but it's also very clearly encircling India, its biggest regional rival.
Well, I mean, to call that an encirclement might be an overstatement. While China might be able to master its, closer friends along the border, and so far, the only reliable, land-based neighbor that is in India's neighborhood will be Pakistan. Whereas, when we talk about the seaboard, I don't think that is one area where China could claim to encircle India beyond, the building of ports and infrastructure. And of course, given the dynamic between India and its South Asian littoral neighbors in the region, I don't think that is entirely possible for China to encircle New Delhi.
Right. But efforts by India to counter China have been less successful. For example, New Delhi and Tokyo, Japan, have offered to build a port in Sri Lanka, but their attempts seem to be less successful. Why do you think that is?
We have a few factors to consider here. One certainly has to do with the fact that China does, make it easier for potential recipient countries such as Sri Lanka to access its investment, or what we call, few strings attached or no strings attached. But more importantly, is to do with the requirements that these countries need to fulfill in order to receive those aid. By contrast, if we talk about Japan, it is more tedious in a way. I mean, it tends to be more onerous when it comes to, the fulfillment of certain requirements. We talk about environmental impact assessment, for instance, and other requirements that will ensure some form of not just environmental sustainability, but also, more importantly, fiscal sustainability. And for India, I think when it comes to infrastructure, India has never been a leading actor compared to China and Japan in this sense. So when we talk about an India-Japan tie-up for Sri Lanka, for example,
right,
it tends to be more Japan playing a bigger role than India.
Right. Do you think democratic countries, Collin, or those that say they want to protect a rules-based consensus, do you think they can collectively counter China when you look at the long-term strategy?
Well, for sure, democratic societies, in theory, may be hobbled by the various layers of, transparency and accountability measures that they will have to address, which they will have to answer to multiple stakeholders. Not to say that, less democratic or authoritarian countries do not have layers of bureaucracy to handle. But, the thing is that for democratic countries, these very often constitute a structural impediment when it comes to responding to, what would be seen as attempts to undermine rules-based order, whether you're talking about, a gray zone approach, lawfare, for example. It is possible to come together for these countries, but I think it is also important to be realistic about, the prospect of having, a concerted approach all the time due to what I would see as not just about the common, political interest or system, but more to do with, real politics. The strategic interest has to coincide ultimately, and how, each democratic country will master their own resources and their own capabilities based on their own circumstances. So I think these are some of the hurdles that I believe, will have to be overcome if you want, a more concerted approach to deal with China.
Do you think, finally, Collin, that China's Asian neighbors are convinced that the U.S. will stick with them, or is it better for them to stay neutral?
Certainly, there has always been a sense of trepidation when you talk about Western Pacific region, mainly East Asia, right? There has been a long-standing concern about U.S. longevity when it comes to its commitment to the region. But that being said, while there has been what we will call a wait-and-see attitude to that, we wouldn't see any stoppage when it comes to ongoing engagement with the U.S., whether economic or in terms of defense and security. But it's quite clear that there is some hedging taking place when countries around China are exploring options beyond the U.S. by deepening their ties with other interested or like-minded powers, such as, for instance, India, Australia, and France, Germany, EU, for instance. I think that approach to try to put your eggs in more than one basket is going to be the approach that's going to be undertaken in the current context of uncertainty.
Collin Koh, thank you so much for your analysis. Thank you for joining us on Counting the Cost.
Thank you so much for having me.
A rare species of firefly found in the forests of Tlaxcala in central Mexico are dying out Unsurprisingly, humans are to blame for the destruction of the forest due to logging and agriculture. And even tourists who come to see the so-called Forest of Lights are contributing to the extinction of the firefly. Al Jazeera's John Holman reports.
A symphony of light in the forests of Tlaxcala, central Mexico. These fireflies pulse and cease in unison, great groups participating in a giant courtship ritual. That coordinated display is what makes this species, Photinus palaciosi, special. And in the last few years, they've had an ever-increasing audience. This is a present for Gael from his girlfriend Erica. They've come all the way from France.
I thought this was a nice idea for his birthday, original idea and different.
It was a surprise until today, so
Yes.
I'm here.
State authorities say the number of visitors to see the fireflies doubled in the 6 years before the pandemic. That's a cause for celebration, but also worry for scientists like Carlos Cordero.
We're going to see them in a critical moment in their lives. And if we disturb that, we disturb the relationship between them and therefore their reproduction.
Torchlight, phones, both distract them. Sound too. If tourists stray from the path, they can also trample the females who can't fly. The concern is that if tourism operators here don't take care, they might lose what attracts their clients in the first place. We're heading up to see the fireflies right now. We're actually with quite a small tour group, and each tour operator has a number of people that they're allowed to take up to see the fireflies each night. What we're being told is that the problem is that tour operators sometimes exceed that number, or people that haven't got a license at all just take people up anyway on clandestine tours. It's a problem in a region with a lot of economic necessity and only 2 months a year to make money from the luminous beetle. But many are aware and regulating themselves.
A lot of the education we give to people is about what not to bring: repellent, bright clothing, to be silent.
Miguel has just begun Oakley glamping, recycling local materials to reduce the environmental impact.
These platforms are from an industrial part of Tlaxcala. There is wood not only for the platform, but also for the bed bases. We use this wood that was in place for these quite rustic tables.
But while he's trying to reuse wood, others are chopping down trees all over the forest. It's perhaps the biggest threat for the fireflies, logging, which squeezes their living space. For now, every June to August, the visual symphony continues. The challenge for the future is to keep the lights from going out. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Tlaxcala, Mexico.
Now, the housing market has been on a bit of a tear in many developed nations. There are many reasons. The cost of borrowing has been held down by central banks, tax cuts, and a desire to move out of cities. But home buyers are also having to compete for homes against some of the world's biggest financial institutions. JP Morgan, Lennar and PSP Investments are pouring money into snapping up family homes. Financial giant Blackstone is buying Home Partners of America for $6 billion. The company owns 17,000 homes. Now, interestingly, the company allows tenants to buy their rentals. In the UK, Lloyds Banking Group plans to buy 50,000 homes over the next 10 years, and retailer John Lewis plans to build 10,000 rental homes. But there's some pushback against giant landlords. Berlin will be holding a referendum in September that would allow the local government to buy 240,000 properties from Germany's biggest publicly listed residential landlord. Well, let's talk to one of those campaigners, Dr. Joanna Kusiak, who's a research fellow in urban studies at King's College, the University of Cambridge, and she's joining us via Skype from Berlin. Thank you so much, Joanna, for being on the show with us. So why has the city decided to vote on seizing these properties from the company that owns them?
Berliners decided to use the power they have in a democratic system and organize this referendum to end the domination of financial markets over our housing system. So what the initiative is trying to do is actually not so much force the city to buy this apartment, but actually to expropriate them, to seize this property from the financial corporation and deprivatize it, take it back to the city with a compensation.
So have the people been evicted from their homes because they haven't been able to pay their rent?
Berlin has relatively strong rental protection laws. So often eviction is not directly that easy, but there's been evictions or people have been priced out of their apartments or evicted under the guise of modernization. So despite the strong legal protections for tenants in Berlin, these corporations, they have their own legal department and they have been very good in finding loopholes in tenant protection laws.
Give us an idea, Joanna, of the rental prices in Berlin. Has there been an increase?
Oh, there's been an unprecedented increase, and especially in some culturally attractive areas of the city like Kreuzberg or Mitte. Within the last 12 years, we could see prices quadrupling. So the start price of renting an apartment would be now 4 times bigger than 12 years ago.
So are investors, wealthy investors, you think, adding to the crisis by buying buildings and leaving them empty?
Absolutely. The corporations that could be expropriated with this referendum operate on the financial markets, and they are loyal to their shareholders and not to the tenants in Berlin. It's structurally logical, but it harms the housing markets in the city.
But Joanna, there's the question also of, why the city would be a better landlord than a stock market listed company.
Well, for many reasons. First being that the city politically must be loyal to its citizens and not to the shareholders who are based mostly abroad and often in tax havens. So the city could also use the income from this rent to build more apartments and also in this way to further overcome the housing crisis. And lastly, Berlin has a huge experience in public landlords. They exist already, and all the polls show that tenants tend to be more happy in public housing than in privately owned or corporate-owned housing.
Right. You talked about, Joanna, an unprecedented increase, you said, in rental prices. To what extent did the pandemic contribute to that, not just in Berlin, but also in the rest of Germany? Is there an increase in the number of renters?
Well, Germany, it is important to remember that in comparison to the world at large, Germany and Berlin in particular has very high number of renters. Berlin is 85% rental. So renting is a system for all levels of the society. I mean, almost everyone is a tenant in Berlin. Mm-hmm. What the global pandemic's shown, of course, is how important housing is for many kind of policies, including health policy, including economic policy, supporting people throughout the pandemics. So definitely pandemics was a factor in Berlin political mobilization because it made these needs even more dire.
Right. Now, the expropriation initiative is based on Article 15 of the German Constitution, which says land, natural resources and means of production can be reclaimed for public ownership in exchange for compensation. It's never been tested in practice. So what are the chances of success?
Yes, that's very exciting because it's one of the basic clauses of the German Constitution that actually has never, ever historically been tried. So legally, we have to speak with a potential new precedent. At the same time, all the legal opinions show that, legally speaking, it would be possible. And if it's politically possible, we'll see during the upcoming referendum. But the latest polls show that the slight majority is for expropriation. So it is a very exciting political moment. It seems that it's possible.
But wouldn't the money required to buy all these properties, Joanna, wouldn't it be better used to build new homes?
Well, this would be much less money available for the new homes because the city is not going to buy those apartments. It's expropriation with compensation. And this compensation, legally speaking, has to be below market prices, because the actual term for what we're trying to do is socialization. It is about increasing the common good or using this housing for common good. That means that the compensation paid to this corporation must be below market prices.
Right, rental prices extremely high, as you said. How easy or difficult would it be to stop speculation and rising rental prices in Germany?
Well, if the referendum is successful, we can expect that this financial speculation on Berlin housing market could be stopped in a way that is globally unprecedented. It would be the first case in the world of a local grassroots initiative managing to break the domination of global financial capitalism. And that makes it politically so exciting, not just for Berlin, but for the whole world.
But the city's attempt to impose a rental cap was struck down by Germany's highest court. On what ground?
The problem was not with the law itself, which was not faulty. The problem was with the competences. So within the federal system, it should have been the federal state imposing such law. And it was done in Berlin on the local level, which in this case could be argued was not possible. This is not going to happen with the expropriation and with the referendum, precisely because there's no legal precedent. The federal state has never attempted anything like that. And therefore, legally speaking, the land of Berlin, which is also land in federal state, has rights to write and impose such law.
It'll be certainly very interesting to see how this pans out. Thank you so much for talking to us, Joanna Kusiak. Joanna, joining us there from Berlin. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Romania has become a dumping ground for most of Europe's illegal wastes. Government officials have told Al Jazeera criminal organizations within the country have made it a big business. Andrew Simmons reports from Bucharest.
This site was registered as a recycling centre, yet it became a mountain of waste mixed with building rubble. Ignored by local authorities for more than 10 years until now.
A lot of plastic, domestic waste, maybe industrial waste in that part.
The new head of Romania's National Environment Agency, Octavian Băceanu, knew nothing about it until sewage pipes beneath the tip collapsed a few weeks ago, flooding a suburb of Bucharest. Aside from the acrid stench and the colossal scale of this tip and others like it, Romania now has an even bigger problem with illegal waste. Go east to the Black Sea port of Constanta, and rubbish is a criminal commodity worth millions of dollars. And a determined prosecutor here is taking on the cartels.
The amount of problem of illegal waste trafficking is comparable with drug trafficking.
Theodor Nitzer faces an overwhelming challenge, but he did smash one audacious plan to import a shipment of toxic waste from Italy. So-called businessmen were involved and they attempted to bribe local officials. Waybills from other European consignments like these show recycling centres as destinations, but instead they go to basic incineration sites or landfill dumps. Pollution on a big scale. This is part of one consignment from the UK, host of COP26, the UN Global Warming Summit, due in November. Nitzer says the UK isn't cooperating enough on getting prosecutions.
I wish to have more collaboration from the part of British authorities. We are fighting against envy crimes, and the envy crimes regards not Romania and not Great Britain. In my opinion, it's a huge problem for all the planet.
Octavian Băceanu says his investigation team is poorly paid and it faces intimidation from criminals.
You're exposing your family, your life. It's a problem. It's a big problem.
The mound Băceanu stands beside symbolises a different era of waste crime, now dwarfed by mafia cartels, bribery, corruption here and overseas. And there's pollution, never seen before, coupled with inaction and apparent indifference in other European states. Andrew Simmons, Al Jazeera, Bucharest.
And that is our show for this week. Get in touch with us by tweeting me at FolibaAJE, and don't forget to use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or drop us an email. Counting the costs at aljazeera.net is our address. But there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. And that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Fuli Batibo from the whole team here in Doha. Thank you for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.